Hi everyone, thanks for listening. This is Greg Jericho, the Chief Economist at the Australia Institute. Today's Dollars and Cents, we have a special crossover edition with our great American politics podcast, After America, which is done by Dr. Emma Shortis, a senior researcher in international and security affairs. I was able to go on and have a chat with her about all of the economics that the Harris campaign is running, and we thought it'd be really good to put it out for you guys as well, but also subscribe to After America. It's a really great podcast. Enjoy the episode. We'll be back with our regular program later on this week when we're all about the GDP. But other than that, enjoy.
I'm Dr. Emma Shortis. I'm a senior researcher in international and security affairs. And this week, we've got a special crossover episode with our friends from one of the Australia Institute's other podcasts, Dollars and Cents. And that's because we wanted to cover something that's not getting a huge amount of attention either here or in the States, and that is the Democrats' economic platform. So we wanted to have a look at what it actually is, what it might mean for the United States, and maybe even for us, both in terms of the actual policy implications, but also the political implications. So we want to ask questions like, what should Australia learn from the Harris platform, and how it might be interpreted here? I'm not an economist, but my friend Dr. Greg Jericho, chief economist here at the Australia Institute, is a really good one. And he's here to talk us through it all. So Greg, it's great to have you on for our very first crossover.
It's really good to be here, Emma, but I was a bit concerned. I was hoping I'd be here to talk about the NFL season, which is starting next week, and the Major League season is coming up to the end. Will we get to 60 home runs and things like this? But no. All right, we'll talk economics, if I have to.
I know about as much about NFL as I do about economics, so we're on really safe ground here, Greg. So to focus on economics and not NFL, Kamala Harris has been criticised by some of the media for not releasing detailed policy proposals, for not answering questions. At the time of recording, her first interview is going to be televised within an hour or so, but some of the forward sizzle is definitely not focusing on her economic policies, I think it's safe to say. So a lot of that criticism is, I suppose, fair, but a lot of it's not, because they actually have provided a bit of detail on their policy platform. So I wondered if, to start, because it's not getting much attention at all, you could take us through what Harris is actually proposing for the American economy as part of her platform, which she's kind of framing, as I see it, as lifting up the middle class. So how is she proposing to do that?
Yeah, and if you watch the convention or any of her speeches or any of Tim Walz's speeches, yeah, it is all about the middle class, middle class.
So this is the part, clip and save it and send it to your undecided relatives so they know.
A strong middle class has always been critical to America's success, and building that middle class will be a defining goal of my presidency.
If you're a middle-class family or a family trying to get into the middle class, Kamala Harris is going to cut your taxes. If you're getting squeezed by prescription drug prices, Kamala Harris is going to take on Big Pharma. If you're hoping to buy a home, Kamala Harris is going to help make it more affordable.
Donald Trump intends to cut Social Security and Medicare. He intends to give tax breaks to billionaires and big corporations and make working families foot the bill.
Like all regular people I grew up with in the heartland, JD studied at Yale, had his career funded by Silicon Valley billionaires, and then wrote a bestseller trashing that community. Come on! That's not what middle America is.
I guess the way in which you could say they're doing it is a number of prongs, some of which are a bit more targeted specifically to families, some of which are more about affecting especially older people who are on prescription drugs, some to do with housing, some going a big business. It's a whole range of things, but it's all targeted at we're going to help lower your cost of living, because cost of living in America, just like here in Australia, is basically the issue, apart from obviously in America, other issues like abortion and things like that. But economically speaking, cost of living is the big one. Housing ties in with that. And so that's really where she's aiming of her policies overall.
And it seems like they're having a kind of similar argument in the States about cost of living and about inflation. And there's a particular focus on grocery prices as well. Is that right?
Yeah. It's exactly the same here. And really because they had exactly the same, in fact, in some ways more so than here in Australia, where company profits really drove inflation. In fact, America was one of the first places where economists were noticing this after the pandemic, going, actually, there's not a lot of wage rises going on here. They looked at the figures and going, yeah, companies are making a lot of profits here. They're doing well out of inflation. And so she's proposing to institute a ban on price gouging to do with food, which immediately had all these conservatives going, oh, this is communism and all this stuff. And it's not really, because it's already in a majority of states in America. They do have these laws. This would just be a national one.
My plan will include new penalties for opportunistic companies that exploit crises and break the rules. And we will support smaller food businesses that are trying to play by the rules and get ahead.
And all it basically is saying, look, if we have a major event like a pandemic or a flood or things like this, there will be a cap on how much you can increase your prices during that event. So it's a little bit like, for people who use Uber and there's a concert on, suddenly there's surge pricing. Basically, that kind of thing occurs also when there's natural disasters and things like that, where companies go, oh, suddenly everyone needs bottled water, so we'll raise the price of bottled water 100%. And this would actually put a ban on that. So it's not like the government would be determining prices just when the shit comes down and everyone's panicking. They're going, no, you cannot take advantage of this bizarre one-off scenario. And as I say, there's about 37 states already have this in place, but a national ban just makes it a lot more comprehensive, means that no one has to really worry about it, and it sort of takes it out of the hands of state government.
So, as you say, not particularly radical and quite specific. But they're also talking about tax in a bit of a different way as well, as I understand it, which maybe is a little bit more radical, especially viewed from Australia, in terms specifically of company and wealth tax.
Yeah, this is something, and we'll get to this later, but it's something where I think Australia can really take a lead. To give some context, before Donald Trump came to power, the federal company tax rate in America was 35%. He dropped it to 21%. Massive drop. Companies loved it. He was saying, oh, this is actually going to generate more government revenue because companies will be so profitable. And no, it didn't. And he was saying, oh, this will create massive investment. No, it didn't. The companies just used all this money to buy back shares, basically to inflate their share price and make all their stockholders happy and their CEOs who are on stock incentive schemes and everything. So it's a terrible policy. Kamala Harris is proposing to raise company tax back to 28%. So actually raising company tax. So if that happens, one, I think it really gives a really good counter to the argument in Australia that we always hear that, oh, we've got to lower our company tax rate, which is at 30% for large businesses. We need to lower it to be competitive. Well, if she is able to get it raised to 28%, that kind of kills that argument. And it also kind of kills the argument that lowering or raising the company tax rate affects investment, it affects the growth in the economy. No, it's basically about getting a share of company profits and being able to use those to help people. It really doesn't have a major impact on their investment decisions, because when you think about it, company tax is levied on profit. So you've got to make that profit first. If you're not making that profit, you're not going to make the investment, and you're not going to pay the tax. So it's really a thing that comes after all their decision making, and it really just is, I think, a bold policy. And you could argue it's a bit populist because people hate companies, and especially when you link it to the fact that companies have been driving inflation through profits. It's like, okay, well, you've had fun times with us. Now we're going to get some payback a bit. So it's one of the better policies that she has on tax. And the other one you point out, it's It's wealth tax. And this is, again, seems controversial because what she's proposing, see, at the moment, and we have this in Australia, capital gains tax, where if you hold an asset or you buy shares and then you sell those shares and you make a profit, or what we call a capital gain, you have to pay a tax on that capital gain. Now in Australia, we have a 50% discount. We'll just know that. What she's saying, though, is let's say you own shares, you bought them at, say, $5 and they're now at $10. You haven't sold them, but your wealth has increased. She's saying there will be a tax, a capital gain tax paid on those unrealized gains. So you'll have to pay a tax on the amount of your stock portfolio or the assets that you hold even before you sell them. And the reason she does this is because it is a bit of a loophole for extremely rich people who hold a lot of shares. Like if you're, when you hear someone talk about Elon Musk and how rich he is, or Zuckerberg, or all these guys, Bezos, it's basically the amount of shares they hold. They don't actually have that
cash.
They don't have that $1 billion sitting in the bank. That is the amount of money if they sold their shares, but they're not having to pay tax on that wealth that they have. Now, she's basically going to propose instituting a tax on unrealized gains, which you could think, okay, people going, oh, God, I just bought investment property and it's gone up and now I've got to pay tax on that even though I haven't sold it, and this is going to be terrible. Most people in America don't have to worry. It's only going to apply when your wealth is over $100 million on unrealized gains. And the Congressional Budget Office has worked out this will probably affect about 10,600 people, which, given what's America got now, 300 and something million.
Something like that, yep.
So not a lot. We're not even talking the 1%. We're talking the 0.1%. But it is, I think, a sensible policy in that there is so much wealth held by that richest 0.1%, and they're not having to pay tax on it. And the reason why she's doing it is because you might think, but they don't have that money. No, but they're able to use that money to invest, to do things. Yeah, it's yes, it's unrealized in the sense that, no, they haven't got in cash, but they're still using that wealth to do things, to buy things, to borrow against, and they're in a sense not realizing it because they know if I sell this, I'll have to pay tax on it. I'm better off not doing it, and I'm still able to, I'm a billionaire.
Yeah, absolutely. Which kind of, it explains two things, really. It explains why those billionaires, particularly prominent figures like Musk, have gone pretty much all in with Donald Trump, but also why they're leaning into culture war issues, which is, I presume, kind of part of an effort to obscure the reality of the policy that you've just explained, that actually this is very specifically targeted at kind of obscenely wealthy people like Musk and is not going to affect, the vast majority of Americans. And so if you lean into those culture war issues, you can obscure that truth.
Yeah, because you can't even, you look at a lot of American tax policy, even income tax policy, and like Harris has sort of gone with Biden's sort of pledge to not raise taxes on anyone earning, I think it's less than like $400,000. It is so high. And also remember, in America, you have joint income tax returns. So if you file jointly, and we'll get to it, the child tax credit applies up to $200,000 or $400,000 if you're a couple. It's so you think it's bad in Australia in what you're not allowed to touch in terms of tax. It's even worse in America. But with this wealth tax, because it is so absurdly high, it's pretty hard to convince anyone to think, that might be me one day. It's not even aspirational, whereas people might aspire to maybe one day have $1 million, but $100 million, it's like, okay, it's even beyond that. And also companies, again, as I say, people are very much feeling ripped off by companies, and rightly so. And so I think that's a tougher sort of economic thing to make people feel like, this is going to hurt me. And so, yeah, you're right. They talk about culture issues and racism, let's be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. They're still trying though, aren't they? Like, Trump's not been able to come up with a nickname for Harris, but I think the closest he's got to a good one is Comrade Kamala.
Yeah, they're trying the communist thing, and that's the big problem with this, is that all of her policies, and we'll get to a few of the others on housing and drugs and things, they're not radical at all. In fact, most Australians would be like, really? They don't do that already? And this is where, someone like Tim Walz has been so good in that he's done a few sort of radical things. And then you think, oh, he's radical. What do you do? Oh, he's provided free meals to kids at school. And is that radical? It sounds nice. And I think that's where they're really struggling to get traction because, again, they can't really hit her on taxes because all the real tax is on extremely rich people or companies. There's no sort of, we're going to raise income taxes. It's not doing that.
And they really, the Republicans have really struggled in particular with the child tax credit stuff because that is overwhelmingly popular. But I think most Australians wouldn't really know what that is. What is the child tax credit? Yeah, the
child tax credit is basically what it says on the box. If you have a child, you get a tax credit. At the moment, it's $2,000 a year. And one thing that changed, I think it was 2021, where it wasn't just you were able to reduce your taxable income. If you didn't pay any tax, you got the full payout in cash, which really countered the claims that the child tax credit was good for people who are earning income, but wasn't really helpful for very low income people. So that changed. So it's basically for every child you've got up to the age of 17, and it's extremely popular. You poll it, it's popular as American Pie, as they say, which is why it's kind of bizarre that just recently the Republicans voted against a bill that contained an element to increase it to, I think it was 2,600 or something like that. And it's why Harris is pledging to increase it to 3,600. That's what she's wanting, and to be $6,000 in the first year of your child. So,
kind of like a baby bonus.
Kind of like it, really. And especially for if you're not paying income tax, I'm pretty sure you actually get it in monthly installments. So you don't just get a big $2,000 check. So it really is kind of a sort of replacing a little bit of, or in addition to sort of welfare payments and things like that for the very low income. The Republicans are all over the shop on this. They're voting against it, but JD Vance just sort of floated it. I'd like to see it increase to 5,000. It's like, so you're saying that, but you didn't even turn up to vote for an increase to 2,600. You claim the Republicans are always, this costs too much money, we can't afford it. And it's like, but they can't be out front against it because it's so damn popular. Because, it's free money in a way.
Absolutely.
And it's a vital policy in America because, of course, it assists the cost of living, but also it's been very helpful at increasing female participation rates, helping sort of people be able to afford childcare and things like that. Yeah. So it is an extremely expensive policy, which is why there is always this limit on how much you can increase it by. But it's certainly something that the Harris campaign is going to keep banging on about. I fully expect in the vice presidential debate that Walz points out, you say this, but you voted against it. So let's believe what you do rather than what you say.
Yeah, absolutely. It's such an easy line to run as well. You say you care about families and children and you're voting against this. And they will keep, of course, running that radical line. None of what you've described is particularly radical, from viewed from the outside. But I wanted to know, if we look at it as a kind of holistic policy platform, even though there are, of course, gaps and details we don't know about, if we assume that Harris is elected, and that's less of an assumption today than it was a few weeks ago.
when we were saying Biden,
yeah. And looking at the latest polls, particularly in swing states. So assuming she is elected, big if, obviously, assuming she also has Congress, which would be critical and is a much bigger if. But, just hypothetically, what does all of this actually look like if she can implement it? Like how radically does it transform the American economy?
To be honest, not much. It really is a bit of just an extension of what's been going on in the last 4 years. There's nothing in here that is as huge as the Inflation Reduction Act.
A major victory for President Biden. House Democrats tonight passing the $740 billion bill, the biggest investment in fighting climate in U.S. history, lowering health care and prescription drug costs, taxing corporations, and lowering the deficit.
Exactly 4 weeks ago today, I signed the Inflation Reduction Act into law. the single most important legislation passed in the Congress to combat inflation, and one of the most significant laws in our nation's history, in my view.
It's a piece of industrial policy, it's a piece of climate policy, it's a piece of trade policy. It's not a piece of inflation reduction.
I said it then, and I'll keep saying it. With this law, the American people won, and special interests lost.
It's like this $3 trillion, I think, multi-trillion-dollar plan, which was initially came out of the Green New Deal, real focused on renewables and invigorating American manufacturing towards renewables. But as always happens with Congress, it got bigger and bigger and includes all these other things in it. And it was cannily retitled as the Inflation Reduction Act to make it sound like this is all going to reduce inflation. So one of the biggest policies really in our lifetimes in American politics by any president. Probably the biggest thing that she's proposing is on housing, because she's proposing building 3 million new houses or homes in 4 years, which is a hell of a lot, given that America builds about 1.5 million new houses each year.
Wow, that's like New Deal scale of
yeah,
construction.
that is big. Now, how? And it's interesting in America, a little bit like here, there's a real fight between the NIMBYs and the YIMBYs. Mm-hmm. And she's sort of going very much on the YIMBY side of things, the yes in my backyard, because she's talking about, and Obama also mentioned this in his speech at the Democratic Convention, of getting rid of zoning laws that are prohibiting building of houses in certain areas. So she wants to free that up so that you can actually build these houses. She's doing something that, or proposing something that Australians would be very familiar with, basically a $25,000 tax credit when you buy your first home. Mm-hmm. So essentially a first home buyer's grant. It's slightly different, and she's also up for providing tax incentives for building your first home and things like that. But she's really putting a big focus on increasing supply, building new homes. Now, a lot of the building new homes coming from incentives to, because in America, a lot more corporations do rent than in Australia. In Australia, it's a lot of mums and dads negative gearing their way. In America, it's a lot more corporate run, so there's a lot more incentives for corporations to build low-cost rental housing, and and putting in place restrictions on what they can do with the rents and things like that. But that's where she's really sort of striking. Now, if that happens, that will be huge. But on other things, prescription drugs, which is a huge thing that she is pushing. Biden and Harris both just a couple of weeks ago announced a deal to lower the cost of prescription drugs. That all came out of the Inflation Reduction Act, because within the Inflation Reduction Act was a clause that made it possible for Medicare, which is America's system that provides healthcare for people over the age of 65, to negotiate with drug companies to basically get a price. And because Medicare is essentially the main buyer of drugs, they're setting a price, in effect sets the price. Before, they weren't able to do that, which, again, people here in Australia, we think about the PBS scheme going, what? Do you had to actually buy your drugs from drug companies? Mm-hmm. And it's like, if you've ever watched any American TV, every second ad, they're not about gambling so much, it's about drugs. It's go to your doctor and ask for this brand drug. Also, penalties on drug companies if they raise drug prices more than inflation. They'd actually have to pay a rebate to Medicare, which they can sort of then pass on and help reduce the costs of drugs. So that's an incentive not to raise your prices. Also, they had a clause, and it only sort of triggers by about 2027, that if drug companies hadn't actually agreed to any drug prices with Medicare, they would start getting taxed at a pretty massive rate, like 65% on things. Yeah. And it would rise sort of 10% every, I think, 6 months or a year, or that, like real incentive to negotiate. So what Harris is saying is, I'll keep doing this. Look at what Trump has proposed, and they're saying, look at Project 2025, which is saying gut the Inflation Reduction Act and get rid of this communism of the government negotiating with prices. Let the free market work. And so that certainly is a key thing. And that's why you saw during the convention a lot of people talking about, I'm on need insulin and things like this. And if Trump gets in, I won't be able to afford it. So, you look at all these things, the housing, groceries, prescription drugs, childcare, these aren't things that would strike Australians as too radical. The wealth tax certainly is like, oh, we're not doing that. We don't tax wealth at all. We're terrible at that. Company tax, even getting at 28%, is still lower than what it is here. So it's certainly not radical. And I don't think it'd be any more radical than what we've seen under Biden, because actually, if you think about what Biden's done, he has been kind of not radical maybe radical in an American sense.
Yeah, I think so.
Radical in an American sense, not radical compared to us. So there's nothing there that I think would have anyone going, wow, this, we haven't seen anything like this before. It's just kind of an extension.
Yeah. But I think we can't underestimate the material impact that that's had on many American lives. You know, like you sort of mentioned that some of the most kind of affecting moments in Biden's administration are people coming up to him and being like, you reduced the cost of my insulin to $30 a month when it was costing me thousands of dollars. Like that's a huge material impact that people are really noticing. But the lead times are long. You know, it takes a while for those policies to have effect, and Biden's not necessarily getting the credit for them, but Harris can kind of take the credit while leaving the kind of sad and angry bits of Biden to the side. But I think that, you know, we've mentioned Australia a number of times as a kind of point of comparison, and that, you know, we already have a number of these things, like the prescription drug stuff in particular. But there are some pretty significant contrasts between economic platforms, and also I think just how the Harris campaign is talking about economics is kind of vibing it and and embracing the base as well. You know, you mentioned Tim Walz and his kind of child-friendly policies and how popular they are, and the fact that they're not apologizing for any of it. They're really embracing it and leaning into the contrast between their economic policy platform and the Republicans. But to kind of, I guess, to like drag it back to Australia and sort of force that comparison, you know, you mentioned the wealth tax. Like, imagine how a wealth tax proposal would go down here in Australia in terms of like how the mainstream media would take it. We've had something similar, you know, with a Greens proposal recently, and, you know, the kind of business media gets up in arms about this. But what sort of tends to happen, historically at least in Australia, is that we do take lessons, I suppose, from American politics, and the Albanese government is particularly close to the Biden administration, particularly, of course, on security issues. We know that. We've had a reminder of that just that week. But they also take lessons from kind of how they do politics, how they do campaigning, and how they do policy platforms. So I guess that's a kind of long way of asking you what you think the Albanese government might learn from the Harris campaign, and is that different to what they should learn? Yeah,
and the ALP in particular has had a history of learning the wrong lessons. You know, they kind of learned from Obama. They were like, oh, we've got to be all social media savvy, and we'll get some consultant who maybe spent a day on the Obama campaign.
They all spent days on the Obama campaign, didn't they?
To come out, and then they'll hire someone to come out here and help. You know, it's like you just missed everything. And it's the same here, I think, with the key, I think, and you nailed it. They're not being embarrassed about who they are. And it's not just on economic things, it's on social issues as well. They're not resiling from things around sexuality and gender even, especially Tim Walz. And he's basically saying, you know, just let people be.
Mind your own damn business.
Yeah, mind your own damn business. And you contrast that to this week with the horrible stuff up that the government got themselves into over whether or not to just include a question on sexuality and gender identification in the census, which just before we recorded, I saw that Anthony Albanese's base said, oh no, we'll include it. It's like you just went through a week of pain because you were scared about getting attacked from the Conservatives. Like, just be proud of who you are in a sense. You say you are progressive, well, be progressive, you know, and don't be ashamed of that. I watch far too many speeches and clips of Harris and Walz and everything, but there's a real sort of sense of this is who we are. We're actually, the things we're doing are nice and good, and, you know, joy is the term that they've been using. Something that I think the government can certainly learn is progressiveness is not about, you know, taxing the rich and you know, becoming a communist state. It's actually about lifting everyone up and saying, actually, we all should be able to have equality to be able to achieve our best, and we're going to help you, and we're not ashamed. You shouldn't be ashamed that you're on unemployment benefits. We're not going to punish you because you don't have a job. Actually, we're going to help you to get a job, and we're not going to make you live in poverty while you're doing it. Or, if you're gay, we're not going to try and avoid talking about that because it might upset some conservatives. Like, no, it's fine. We're all who we are. And you just get this sense from the government, the Albanese government, that there's not that joy of being in power and actually being able to do things. It's all worry and concern about, are we going to upset someone in the media, or are we going to give the opposition something to attack us on? And as we've seen, they'll attack you on anything. It doesn't matter. And if you're not doing anything, they'll find something to attack you on. So what we've seen, especially the shift from Biden to Harris, especially because the policies, there's been a few little changes, but what's really been the difference is it's just full-throated, this is who we are, this is what we want to be, this is the country we want to have. Come on, be with us, join it. Isn't it fun? Isn't it good? Rather than this sense of, it's all about defending what we're doing and, avoiding being wedged. And it's like they're in effect re-wedging Trump, because when they were criticizing, they're like, why are you criticizing? Doesn't this sound reasonable? Doesn't this sound nice? Doesn't this sound right? And, you could have seen this week with the census thing. If they put it, I don't think would have been an issue. But even how they're like, what are you talking about? We're just asking a question. Why are you being weird?
Why are you being weird?
Exactly. And that's, my fear is they'll embrace that in a parroting way and say, why is he being weird? And everyone go, oh God, you're just copying it. But in a sense, that's kind of where they need to get to in an Australian kind of way, because it's a sense of most Australians no one wants culture wars. They're boring, they're awful, they're tiring. No one likes caring about the government, but you like feeling like they're doing something, and I like what they're doing, and they're in charge. And there's no sense of, at the moment, the government wanting to be in charge. Whereas when you listen to Walz, listen to Harris, it's like, they want to win government because they actually like governing. They like what government can do. They think the government can actually make lives better for everybody. And that's what I think one of the things that Labor really needs to grab hold of is governments are good. Governments can do good things. Vibes are important, but and we're sort of saying this before, one of the reasons why Harris can be about the vibes is she's actually got all of the things that the Biden government has done. The fact that they've been able to reduce the price of prescriptions, which again to Australians sounds weird, to Americans is just jaw-dropping, life-changing, amazing. No one could think of going back, to use the Harris phrase, but it's because that's already happened. If she didn't have that, if they didn't have all those policies, it'd all be, this is a bit hollow, this is a bit nothing. Whereas she's able to say, there's things that she can campaign on that people can go, that was actually good, I want more of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've been saying for a while, you can't underestimate the power of vibes in politics, especially when they're backed up by actual substance, as you say. And Harris is in this kind of extraordinary position where she can be the change candidate while continuing, while sort of simultaneously being the incumbent. But I think what she has there and what she's really nailing at the moment is exactly as you were saying, Greg, that kind of having an actual vision for the future of where you want to go, what kind of country you want to be, which neither Biden nor Trump were able to do, and they've said that, the campaign has said that quite clearly. They're all about looking backwards, and we are looking forward to the future and to a better future. And we're actually excited about what we might be able to achieve. And that has been completely absent from American politics for, a decade, maybe even more than a decade.
Yeah. And, she's really helped by the fact that Trump is just basically this broken down circus that's just keep going around. It's like, oh God, this is tired. It was fun 10 years ago, but no, I've seen the act and it's still the same. And before we started this, I was playing some of his speech and it could have been from 2016. It's the same thing. It's boring. It's tired. If there wasn't a Trump, and this is why vice presidents often fail to get elected, is because they are the incumbent. Whereas she's in this weird thing of she's not the incumbent. It's bizarre.
It is really
strange.
And
it really is shaken up American politics. And thankfully for us and for anyone who actually wants a decent American government, it's taken it from looking like a Trump certainty to now it's game on.
Well, we can I hope so, Greg. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy podcasting schedule to join us on this crossover. And we'll keep an eye on that economic policy platform and maybe have a chat again before November or even after.
That'd be great, Emma. Love it.
Thanks, Greg.
That's where we'll leave this special crossover. Thank you very much for listening, and thank you, Emma, for having me on the After America podcast. This episode of Dollars and Cents / After America was recorded on Friday, the 30th of August, and some things may have changed. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to Dollars and Cents and After America so that you don't miss out on any of our podcasts, including the next one on Dollars and Cents, which will be out in a few days. You can reach us, of course, with feedback on this episode or any others at our email podcasts@australiainstitute.org.au. Or you can find us on Twitter and other social media at the Oz Institute, and that's AUS for Oz. You can also find me, of course, on my social media handles, Grog's Gamut, whether it's Twitter, Threads, wherever. Our music is from Blue Dot Sessions, and we'll be back later on this week. I'm Greg Jericho. Thank you for listening. See you all then.